Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong Week in Review. This show was recorded over the weekend at various times. Today is Monday, September 5th, 2022. I'm Vahram Ter-Matevosyan and I'm here with Hovik Manucharyan. Before we begin the show, we'd like to request that you subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Twitter. We're very active on Facebook, both as a group and a page. And also subscribe and rate our podcasts, which you can listen to wherever you get your podcasts. All of our Groong links are on our Linktree page. We'll make sure you can find that on all of our profile pages, so you can click on them and find us on all social media platforms. So if you like our shows, please share them with your friends and follow us everywhere you are used to getting your news. Thanks, and on with the show. Here are the major topics we'll touch on today. September 2 is Artsakh Independence Day. September 2 is a public holiday commemorating the day 31 years ago when the Nagorno Karabakh Republic declared independence from the Soviet Union. Before 2020, this was a festive day. This year, not so festive. We'll talk a little bit about two major meetings this week between Armenia and Azerbaijan. On August 30th, the deputy prime ministers met in Moscow. Then on August 31st, Pashinyan and Aliyev met in Brussels. Next, we'll talk about the so-called normalization with Turkey. We've read reports that the fifth meeting in the Turkish Armenian normalization process will occur in September. So we'll discuss the pros and cons of that process with Professor Vahram Ter-Matevosyan. And Mikhail Gorbachev passed away. We'll talk to Professor Sanjian and also Ter-Matevosyan for their recollections of the years leading up to and following the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. To talk about the geopolitics, we have with us Benjamin Boghosian, who is the chairman of the Yerevan-based think tank Center for Political and Economic Strategic Studies. Hello and welcome, Benjamin.
Hello.
Hello, Aspet. Hello, Hovik. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Great to have you with us. All right. 31 years ago, on September 2, the Republic of Nagorno-Karabakh declared independence from the USSR. It was the initial step by the Supreme Council of Karabakh, which has been then ratified on December 2 in a public referendum. While normally this would have been a festive date, since the war in 2020, this date has become yet another one to remember our fallen heroes and the events of the recent years. So, both in Yerevan and Stepanakert this year, there were political protests against the policies of Nikol Pashinyan and Arayik Harutyunyan by extension. The Yerevan protest was the long-awaited reboot of the resistance movement. Hovik, can you tell us briefly what happened during that protest? What was talked about? Did the opposition heed Edgar Azarian's call to start impeachment proceedings? Just give us an update.
Yeah, this will be a very short update, Aspet. And basically, the protest did gather, significant number of people. I guess it was mid-size compared to others. As we talked with Edgar Azarian and also with Anna Abrahamian recently, there was a lot of pressure to start the impeachment process, at least try it and see who is on our side and who isn't. But unfortunately, I don't think the resistance movement opposition, let's put it that way, agrees with that. And the reasoning that they gave was that, first of all, while formally while officially, I guess the opposition had 36 votes, and that's the minimum required to start the proceedings, because of losing one member, Ishan Zakarian, he became independent. The opposition now has only 35 votes it can count on to even launch the process. And they seem to suggest that even that was going to be a hard sell. And in order to successfully impeach Pashinyan, the parliament would require 54 votes. So 18 or 19 essentially civil contract MPs would need to convert. Ishan Zakarian basically said that, no, we will not proceed with this right now, but we will launch consultations and we will figure out the right time to do this. But when the time comes, they will require only 3 or 4 days. They will need immense public pressure on the streets in order to convince those 18 or 19 civil contract MPs to switch sides and support the impeachment. I think this will draw strong sort of indignation from supporters of Edgar Azarian. And basically, Edgar Azarian had a live and he said, well, at least get a statement signed that you want Pashinyan out. And he's circulating several different petitions, and basically in one of those petitions, he's actually even saying, write the name of the candidate that you want as prime minister, in my stead. If I could just say in one sentence, I think there's more disorganization right now, and lack of sort of clarity what the opposition wants to do. At least that's my take of the whole protest.
Yeah, and it looks like they have a lot of work ahead of them, because if you're counting the votes that they're going to have in an impeachment vote, and they're expecting 17, 18, 19 votes to peel off from civil contract, there's a huge amount of one-on-one work that they need to do still.
Yeah. We'll keep updating you as new developments arise. Okay, with that under the belt, let's move to developments in geopolitics. There were two major meetings this week between Armenia and Azerbaijan. On August 30, the deputy prime ministers met in Moscow. Then August 31st, Pashinyan and Aliyev met in Brussels. The meeting in Moscow on August 30th is interesting. The deputy PMs, as I said, Meher Grigoryan and Shahin Musafayev, held a border demarcation commission meeting in Moscow, and together with the Russian deputy PM, Alexei Overchuk. And this was, as I said, on August 30th. While Armenia earlier initially rejected the process, basically putting a precondition of Azerbaijan withdrawing its forces from Armenian territory, they seem to have changed their stance and have removed the precondition and agreed to start this process. And now, however, Vigen Khachatyan from Civil Contracts said that the process is expected to take a very long time. The opposition fears that, the same as the so-called peace negotiations, the government is engaging in this process from a position of weakness, ready to concede Armenian territory in exchange for moving the process forward to Azerbaijan's advantage. Benjamin, the only agreement we read about in the Armenian MFA's announcement about this was to hold a subsequent meeting about border demarcation. Is there any tangible outcome from this process?
I don't believe that we had any tangible outcomes from the meeting of August 13th, because according to public available information, they simply discussed some procedural issues, which itself is very strange because they had more than 3 months to discuss these procedural issues. Now, let's not forget that the first meeting took place, I believe, on May 24, near the Armenian-Azerbaijan border. And after 3 months, just came to Moscow. And I believe this was a meeting not only between the deputy prime minister, but also between experts, because at least officially, Armenia sent 11 people to Moscow, like representatives of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, National Security Service, and some other representatives of some other state bodies. And I believe Azerbaijani delegation was more than 20 people. But again, after 3 months of break to come to Moscow and only to agree that, okay, we have to discuss how we are going to move forward, procedural issues, and etc., it proves that I believe neither side gave too much significance to this meeting. And most probably it was a meeting simply because, okay, there were some agreement both with Russians and also with Charles Michel that the meeting should take place until end of summer, the first so-called full meeting between commissions. So they decided that, okay, let's organize the meeting, but I don't believe there were any important discussions. But at the end of the day, I would agree with your assessment that currently, in general, this Armenian-Azerbaijan negotiation process looks like this way. Okay, Azerbaijan knows that he is strong. Armenia knows that he is very weak. Armenia believes that because it lost the war, it has no other options than to agree to Azerbaijani demands. And Azerbaijan knows that Armenia thinks this way. So the situation is this way. Azerbaijan puts demand on Armenia. Behind the closed doors, we don't know. Maybe Armenian government agrees, maybe semi-agrees. But publicly, they are not in a position to say that, okay, agreed on everything. Then Azerbaijan waits. Then Azerbaijan escalates. And after escalation, Armenian government and government of Nagorno Karabakh Republic, they say, okay, because Azerbaijan escalates and because we are weak, let's not make more casualties. These few casualties are sufficient for us, so we are going to accept and realize Azerbaijani demands. This pattern was very clear during this Berdora-Avnon-Sus crisis, when Azerbaijan, since April 2022, demanded that, okay, Armenia should leave these villages until end of July, and Armenia should start to use new highways starting from beginning of August. Armenian government did nothing to do this, albeit there are rumors that within closed doors there were some agreements reached between Armenia and Azerbaijan. But at the end of the day, publicly, Armenian government rejected this. We all remember that in midsummer, both Prime Minister and also Secretary of Security Council, they made statements that Armenia at least had 1.5 years to deal with
Yeah.
the issue of Verdor, Agamno, Nerkinsus. Then Azerbaijan escalated. August 1st, August 3rd, we had some casualties. And then on August 5th, Armenian government said, okay, we cannot do anything. And especially they criticized also Russia, arguing that Russia did not protect us. So because Russia did not protect us and we do not have enough power to protect ourselves, that is why we have to accept Azerbaijani demands. As far as I understand, jumping into the second meeting which happened on August 31 in Brussels, my understanding, based on available public information, is that Azerbaijani president put very clear three demands on Armenian side. First, to dissolve the Nagorno Karabakh Defense Army. Second, either to provide a corridor via Syunik. And under the term corridor, Azerbaijan understands no Armenian passport and customs control for Azerbaijanis traveling from Azerbaijan to Nakhchivan via Syunik, or if Armenia insists on passport and customs control, then Armenia should agree that Azerbaijan will also have passport and customs control along this new highway which connects Armenia with Karabakh. So this is second demand. Either you are giving us corridor, or you agree that we should have customs and passport control for Armenians traveling from Armenia to Karabakh and vice versa. And third demand, to sign peace treaty with Azerbaijan until end of the year, and legally and publicly confirm that Karabakh is part of Azerbaijan, and that there is no Karabakh as a territorial unit. The only thing is about protection of Armenian minority in Azerbaijan. And this is the same as protection of rights of Polish minority in Azerbaijan, Lesbian minority in Azerbaijan, Russian minority in Azerbaijan, Jewish minority in Azerbaijan, and maybe within this peace treaty, like to receive some guarantees that Azerbaijan will protect the rights of Armenian minority. So these are three demands, as far as I understand. And if the pattern will be the same, I'm afraid that we will have a situation when Azerbaijan will escalate, and then Armenian Nagorno-Karabakh authorities will say, okay, look, Azerbaijan escalates, we are weak, we cannot do anything, we have to accept demand first. Then maybe we will have second escalation, acceptance of second demand, third escalation, acceptance of third demand. At least I see dynamic in this way.
Right. Now, going back to specifically the demarcation and delimitation, when Azerbaijan took over the Goris-Kapan highway, I guess a soft pillow, as they say in Armenian, papuk bart, was put under the heads of many Armenians, where Pashinyan assured, okay, it's just a territorial disagreement. We will solve this through demarcation and delimitation. But what do you really think is the outlook of this? Because even after a peace agreement, this process could extend for a long time. So what do you think is the outlook of this border demarcation and delimitation process? Do you think even, in the case of a peace agreement, this will be resolved quickly? Or as I suspect, and many others, there'll be a long period of, negotiations about every single millimeter. And basically, we will not be able to use Goris-Kapan for a very long time.
Okay, I will be very, very much surprised if, as a result of any process, including the delimitation and demarcation, again, as a result of any process besides military action and war, I will be very much surprised if Azerbaijani troops will withdraw even 1 centimeter from the territories which now they control, because Azerbaijani position is very clear, and it was stated by President Aliyev that there is no even single Azerbaijani soldier in Armenian territory. Azerbaijani soldiers are on Azerbaijani territory, and they are not going to give even an inch of Azerbaijani territory to Armenia. And second, if we discuss what is probable and what is not, unfortunately, I believe as a result of delimitation and demarcation, it is much more probable than Armenia will lose the so-called enclaves. I mean, several villages in Taush region and the Tigranashen village in Ararat region. This is much more probable than hoping that, for example, Azerbaijani troops will withdraw from original M2 highway connecting Goris-Kapan.
Right. Okay. All right. So, Benjamin, let's go now to the meeting in Brussels on August 31st, which we talked about a little bit already. The day after this border commission meeting in Moscow, the two countries represented by their, executive leaders met in Brussels. This was the third meeting in 2022 between Prime Minister Pashinyan and President Aliyev under the auspices of the EU co-president Charles Michel, who released a statement to report on the meeting. Again, it's hard to discern what tangible results were achieved, with the exception that Azerbaijani officials, especially Hikmet Hacıyev, profusely thanked Charles Michel and so forth for their facilitation of the meeting. What are your thoughts on what happened in the meeting and at a high level?
As far as I understand, in the meeting, President Aliyev put forward these three demands and said that, okay, we are not going to wait for several years to meet another three times in 2023, then to meet another three times in 2024 in Brussels, maybe four times in 2025 in Moscow, and to discuss all these issues like Zangezur corridor, dissolution of Nagorno Karabakh Defense Army, and peace treaty between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And also the same rhetoric is coming from Azerbaijani expert community, from journalists, that Azerbaijan is not going to waste another 26 years on futile negotiations. Either Armenia will accept our demands, or we will force Armenia to accept our demands by using force.
Okay.
And let's not forget that according to Azerbaijani logic, what are Azerbaijanis telling even publicly? They said, okay, 26 years, we were speaking and we were negotiating and nothing happened. 44-day war and almost everything happened. Like we didn't get even 1 inch of territory during 26 years of negotiation. 26 years of negotiation, it's been almost 10,000 days. So 10,000 days, negotiations, nothing happened. 44-day war, and Azerbaijan, as a result of war and as a result of forcing Armenia to sign November 10 statement, Azerbaijan took 8,000 square kilometers. But what are Azerbaijanis telling? They are telling that we are not going to wait another 26 years for another war to take this remaining 3,000 square kilometers. This time, maybe they say we are not going even to wait for several years. Azerbaijan is telling that, okay, 18 months passed, or not 18 months, almost 2 years passed since the end of the war, or at least 22 months is passed since the end of the war. And this is pretty enough time for Armenia either to accept our demands or to be forced to accept our demands. So my understanding is that Aliyev was very clear cut behind the closed doors. That, okay, guys, these are my three demands, okay, and you have maximum several months. Either you are accepting this or you will face very, very, very hard time. And the problem is here that during these 22 months after the end of the war, Armenian government almost did nothing to reduce the military gap, the gap between military powers of Armenia and Azerbaijan. And again, I'm emphasizing the word reduce, not to eliminate, because obviously it's impossible to eliminate this huge military gap within 22 months. But it was at least possible to reduce military gap. But because Armenian government did nothing or almost nothing to reduce this military gap, everyone knows that if Azerbaijan starts to shoot, Armenia will lose. So if everybody knows this, and Azerbaijan is telling that, okay, I'm going to shoot, if you are not going to realize or to implement demands, then, what's the alternatives or options for Armenia? One option is to ask Russia that comes and don't allow Azerbaijan to do that, shoot against Azerbaijani soldiers, destroy your relations with Azerbaijan, complicate your relations with Turkey, while we all know that Russia needs Turkey now. But I don't think that this is going to work. And in Moscow, maybe some people are thinking that Armenia is doing this deliberately to create tensions between Russia and Azerbaijan or complicate Russia-Turkey relations. But they are not going to do that because from their logic, okay, if you are ready to give up your land, and the situation in Berdur, Susagavno proved that government, but also the society in general, it was very quiet. Everybody was doing its everyday business. Yes, many Armenians are now suffering because we have huge inflation and etc., etc. And it's really difficult to live in Armenia if you're not among the few percentage of this upper middle class or rich people. But at the end of the day, yes, people were suffering due to inflation. But again, besides very few voices, handful voices, Armenian society in Armenia was very quiet about leaving additional lands to Azerbaijan. So, okay, if the United States, if Russia, European Union, Iran, Turkey, they see that both Armenian state and Armenian society sees no problem to give lands to Azerbaijan, then of course, so when they are discussing different options for different solutions, they will say, okay, let's choose a solution according to which Armenia loses more territories because these people are ready to do that. They are not complaining. So if Armenia is happy, or at least Armenia is not unhappy to lose lands, so
Yeah.
why anybody should be unhappy?
The reactions to these meetings are also very interesting to me. I think they're more interesting than actually the outcomes, which we've seen, Pashinyan capitulate over and over. So there's nothing surprising there. But one note in the report said that there was an agreement to move the next border commission meeting to Brussels, which until now, all of them have been held in Moscow. And in addition to this, the next meeting between Aliyev and Pashinyan will also be in Brussels in November. And it seems like that one is being geared up to be like a meeting where there's something maybe signed even, I'm not sure. But Russia essentially mocked the effectiveness of the Brussels meeting and saying that, the Deputy Prime Minister Overchuk's border commission meetings with the Armenian and Azerbaijan Deputy Prime Ministers achieved more than the Michel summits. This agreement, Benjamin, in your opinion, to move the border commission meeting to Brussels, is it a win for the EU and a slap at Russia, or is it nothing?
No, I wouldn't use such categoric terms like win for EU, slap for Russia. As far as I remember, even at the beginning, when the first meeting took place on May 24, along near the border of Armenia and Nakhchivan, near the village of Yerevan, I believe at that time there was an agreement that first meeting should take place in Moscow, and the second meeting or third meeting should take place in Brussels. But why Russia? Russia is not concerned, but I believe Russia is annoyed because from Russian perspective, they say, okay, President Putin put huge personal efforts in all this. All principal agreements were reached in Moscow, but then EU came, called Pashinyan and Aliyev to Brussels, and then starting to make statement that, okay, EU is a successful negotiator or successful mediator. So Russia thinks that simply EU tries somehow to steal the medals for mediating. However, at the strategic level, one thing is unclear for me, and this is very important. We all know that EU and the United States, they both push for Armenia and Azerbaijan to sign the peace treaty as quick as possible. And this is very clear, this is very public. Almost every week, we see statements from State Department that the United States is really interested to push Armenia and Azerbaijan to sign peace treaty as soon as possible, and the United States is ready to support Armenia and Azerbaijan in bilateral negotiations to reach this end. Okay, EU obviously is interested in signing peace treaty. Not only Charles Michel, but also Josep Borrell made statements, many statements that the European Union believes that the peace treaty between Armenia and Azerbaijan is the right way towards a long-time peace, lasting peace and stability in the South Caucasus. Now, Russia also speaks about peace treaty, but also Russia understands that if there is a peace treaty which will fix the status of Nagorno Karabakh, then Azerbaijan will have all trump cards, and the West will have all trump cards to demand the withdrawal of Russian peacekeepers from Nagorno Karabakh in November 2025. Here the question arises, is it possible to sign a peace treaty simultaneously somehow leaving the status of Karabakh or issue of status of Karabakh in some limbo, which may satisfy Russia, and Russia may use this limbo telling that, okay, I'm not able and I can't withdraw my troops because it will bring another war, another bloodshed, ethnic cleansing, and etc. So this is a really crucial question, because if Russia believes that peace treaty with fixing of status of Nagorno Karabakh is okay for Russia, because maybe he had some secret or clandestine deal with Azerbaijan, that even if Armenia agrees that there is no Nagorno Karabakh, Azerbaijan will not demand the withdrawal of Russian peacekeepers in November 2025. So this is option number one. Russia also supports peace deal because he got some understanding or received some very ironclad guarantees from President Aliyev that even if peace treaty is signed, and even if Armenia agrees that there is no Nagorno Karabakh as a territorial unit, Azerbaijan will not demand the withdrawal of Russian peacekeepers. This is option number one. Option number two, Russia believes that peace treaty can't be signed without mentioning any word about Nagorno Karabakh, but this will allow Russia to claim that still there is a limbo, because yes, there is nothing in agreement about or peace treaty about Nagorno Karabakh, but Nagorno Karabakh Armenians are there. They don't want to be part of Azerbaijan. So sorry guys, I cannot leave my troops because it will pave the way for renewed hostilities, war, ethnic cleansing, and etc. etc. This is option number 2. And there is option number 3 that Russia believes that peace treaty in any case may jeopardize its presence of its troops in Nagorno Karabakh, and Russia is against peace treaty. Regardless, it will have some mentions about Nagorno Karabakh or it will have nothing about Nagorno Karabakh. So one thing which is very interesting that I'm not pretty sure which option currently Russia views as more Russia friendly, or maybe their option number 4. I don't know, because strategically everything else is very clear. The US wants Armenia-Azerbaijan peace treaty. EU wants Armenia-Azerbaijan peace treaty. Azerbaijan wants Armenia-Azerbaijan peace treaty, fixing that there is no Nagorno-Karabakh. EU and the US thinks that maybe in the peace treaty there should be some autonomous status for Nagorno-Karabakh, some autonomous status. But if Armenia agrees to drop even this, US and the EU will not be very much upset. Both Armenia thinks it's very contradictory.
Benjamin, is there an option 4 where a peace treaty is signed that mandates that Russian forces are going to continue protecting Nagorno-Karabakh?
Also, it could be also option 4, by the way, theoretically, but the problem from Armenia is that we are not in a position to assess the likelihood of each options. Like to say, okay, the likelihood of like the most likely scenario is option 1st or option 4, the likely scenario is option 2nd, unlikely scenario is option 3rd. But the most catastrophic thing for Armenia is that all scenarios are bad for Armenia, because you know that in scenario building, you have a good scenario, realistic scenario, nightmare scenario, and you have scenarios divided by likelihood. Like, okay, the best case scenario for Armenia, but it's less likely.
Okay.
The middle scenario for Armenia is more likely. But unfortunately, all 4 options, I mean 3 options plus the option which you just mentioned, they all are bad for Armenia. So the problem here is that we do not have any good scenarios. And I'm not even speaking about best scenarios, because in any case, if Armenia recognizes Nagorno-Karabakh as a part of Azerbaijan, it means that everything is finished. It means that Armenians will leave Karabakh quicker. Yes, maybe Russia could come to a deal with Azerbaijan to keep its troops there until 2030 or even 2035. But at the end of the day, our goal is not having Russian troops in Karabakh. Our goal is having Armenians in Karabakh and having the hope that Karabakh will be independent or part of Armenia. If we do not have any hope and we agree that Karabakh is Azerbaijan, I don't think it's much different for Armenia. There are 20,000 Russian troops there, 4,000 Russian troops there, or 0 troops there.
Yeah, I guess that matters to Russia more than it matters to
Yes,
Armenians.
then Armenia. And just a few words regarding Armenia's position. It's very contradictory, because when Azerbaijan came forward with its 5 principles for peace treaty, then at the beginning of May, Armenia publicized its 6 principles. Of course, only one was principle, other 5 were just fixing of fakes or elaborations, but the one principle, the only one principle which Armenia put forward as a base for future peace treaty was the fact that the final status of Nagorno-Karabakh should be part of negotiations and should be part of peace treaty. And this was stated
Rejected
publicly by Prime Minister in early May. Okay, Azerbaijan rejected, but the problem is that in late July, the Secretary of Security Council of Armenia made a statement that even now Armenia thinks that we should separate Karabakh, the issue of Karabakh from peace treaty, and there should be no even single word about Karabakh in peace treaty. So there was a really U-turn, a 180-degree U-turn within 3 months, beginning of May, Armenia's official position. Negotiations should also include the final status of Nagorno-Karabakh, and the issue of Nagorno-Karabakh should be part of peace deal. At the end of July, Armenia's position. Nagorno-Karabakh issue has nothing to do with peace treaty, and we believe that in peace treaty there should be nothing about Nagorno-Karabakh. But then just yesterday, or day before, on September 3rd, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ararat Mirzoyan, made a statement commenting the Aliyev's statement that Armenia agreed that only Azerbaijani 5 principles will be the base for negotiations or drafting peace treaty. And on September 3rd, Ararat Mirzoyan said that no, this is not true. Armenia presented its 6 principles, among which the principles that the issue of status of Nagorno Karabakh should be part of negotiations on peace treaty, and Nagorno Karabakh itself should be somehow mentioned in the peace treaty. And Vahram Ter-Matevosyan stated that Armenia still believes that this should be done this way. So now it's no one can understand. So can we say that now, within 40 days, Armenia again made a U-turn, comparing at the end of July, and now believes that no, Nagorno Karabakh, status of Nagorno Karabakh should be part of peace deal negotiations, and Nagorno Karabakh issue should be part of peace treaty? Or we have different opinions within our Armenian government, like Secretary of Security Council thinks different thing, Minister of Foreign Affairs believes in total different things. So this really creates mess. Either Armenia is making U-turns every 3 months or every 40 days, or Armenian officials are confused and everyone supports different options.
Yeah.
Benjamin, we're preparing to interview Vahram Ter-Matevosyan and about their paper that he and the colleague just published about Armenian foreign policy. And I think the last statement in the abstract is very apropos, so I wanted to read it. Basically, it says that the article argues that the incoherent and erratic nature of the new regime's policy formulation and enactment, which underestimated acute security challenges and degraded existing institutional checks and balances, caused unprecedented wreckage to Armenia's national security architecture. And it seems like this incoherent and erratic nature is continuing.
Okay, I believe it was Einstein who said very genius word. If you are repeatedly doing the same and hoping to reach different result, something is wrong with your brain. If
That
I
is
remember
insanity.
correctly. Yes, there is insanity, yes.
Benjamin, recently the Turkish Foreign Minister Cavusoglu said that Turkey may engage in dialogue with Syria without preconditions. In the context of cooperation and competition between Russia and Turkey across multiple fronts, including the Middle East, the South Caucasus, and even some of Northern Africa, is this announcement a net positive or a net negative for us? What do you think about its effects?
I believe that these potential Turkey-Syria negotiations are mediated by Russia. And the core goal of Russia is somehow to decrease the tensions between Turkish and Syrian governments and use them against Syrian democratic forces or against Syrian Kurds, but in reality against Americans, because we all know that Syrian democratic forces, which controls about 20% of territory of Syria, in northeastern part of Syria, they are supported by United States and they are protected by 900 special US forces who are still deployed in northeastern Syria. And we all know that also United States facilitated the sale of oil from northeastern part of Syria to somehow finance the Syrian democratic forces. So as far as I understand, Russia thinks, and Russia sends messages to Turkey and Syria that, look, guys, okay, the Kurds are the number one enemy of Turkey, and this is obvious. And the US support to Syrian democratic forces and US supports to these YPG people, which have connection with PKK, and PKK is forging war against Turkey starting from 1984, I believe. So Kurds are number one enemy for Turkey, and Russia tells Assad, look, guys, if you believe that Syria should protect its territorial integrity, the ultimate danger is not Turkey, who occupies part of Afrin and Idlib. The ultimate danger is Syrian democratic forces, but the ultimate danger is United States, who de facto creates some quasi-Kurdish state which controls 20% of Syrian territory, while Turkey occupies either directly, like in Afrin, or through Turkish loyal opposition forces like in Idlib, while Turkey controls up to 12-13% of Syrian territory. And Russia tells Assad that, look, guys, at least you can somehow come to terms with Turkey through my mediation. But are you sure that we'll be able to start to speak with Americans? No, I don't think so. So from Russian perspective, okay, the Kurds are enemy of Turkey, and Kurds are presenting more threat to Syrian territorial integrity than temporary or de facto or de jure Turkish occupation of some Syrian territories. But at the end of the day, Russia thinks to create more problems for Americans. If they are able to unite Turkish and Syrian forces to fight Syrian Kurds, it will mean fight against United States, and it will mean more problems between Turkey and the United States. And it will mean theoretically more problems even within NATO. Let's not forget that starting from 2020, Russia organized several meetings between the director of Turkish intelligence service, Hakan Fidan, the intelligence service MIT, and the director of Syrian intelligence service. The first meeting took place in January 2020, just before the COVID. And the last meeting happened in late August 2022 in Moscow. So Hakan Fidan flew to Moscow, the director of Syrian intelligence flew to Moscow, and they had a meeting. And as far as I know from publicly available sources, Sergei Shoigu was present at the meeting and was mediating the meeting. So this is a little bit different. This is Russian efforts to create more problems for Americans in Syria, and at the end of the day, force Americans to leave this northeastern Syria, because simultaneously Russia, they are speaking with Kurds, telling that, look, Americans, at the end of the day, they will betray you, like President Trump betrayed you in October 2019, when he allowed Erdogan to attack part of northeastern Syria. And Russians, they tell Turkey and Syria, look, your first enemy is Kurds and United States, which supports Kurds and which supports this semi-autonomous Kurdish region. But also they are telling Kurds that, look, guys, you are simply tools in the hand of Americans to put pressure against Turkey and Syria. But at the end of the day, America will solve its problem with Turkey and maybe even with Syria and will betray you. So the best thing to do is to start negotiations with Assad. So in the grand design, Russia believes that if we can first facilitate some Syria-Turkey dialogue, then facilitate some Syria-Kurdish dialogue, then maybe it will be possible to somehow have, in general, understanding between Turkey, Syria, and Syrian Kurds that Americans should be kicked out from northeastern Syria.
So you think that the Russians are basically mediating some kind of dialogue between the Syrians and the Turks. They're not necessarily conceding something to Turkey, because my fear is always that if the Russians are conceding something to Turkey over here, what could they be conceding to Turkey over in the South Caucasus?
Now, my assessment is that Russia simultaneously mediating between Assad and Kurds and between Turkey and Syria. But frankly speaking, I don't believe that it's all things that, okay, Russia will give something in Libya, or will take something in Libya, but will give something in South Caucasus to Turkey. Because at the end of the day, yes, of course, Russia wants to be a global player or global power. And if you are a global power, you should be present in, you should project your power in different parts of the world. This is a true nature of global power. Power projection in different parts of the globe. But at the end of the day, Russia knows very well that post-Soviet space is much, much, much more important for Russia than Syria, Libya, Nicaragua, Cuba, Africa, I don't know, ASEAN, and etc. So I don't believe that, at least as far as the current Russian leadership is there, they will say, okay, let's give up some portion of post-Soviet space to receive something in Libya. No, for me, it does not sound logical.
And it's interesting that there were some reports in the last few days that the US is establishing a third base in Syria. I guess this was reported by the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, and the third base is going to be in the Nakara village, which is 3 kilometers from Kamishli. Any thoughts about that? It seems like the US does not want to leave Syria.
Definitely, at least current administration does not want to leave, because they think that this is a good place to be there to counter Iranian influence, first of all. This is also the part of game between US and Iran. Also, somehow this is a leverage against Turkey. If you are somehow protecting the Kurds, and at the end of the day, you can sell Kurds for Turkey receiving something.
Yeah.
Like now, Kurds are a bargaining chip for US, also in their deals with Turkey. And also, the military presence in Syria is a way to counter Iranian influence. Let's not forget that, for example, Americans established 2 bases, at least as of now. One in northeastern Syria and one in Al-Tanf, near the crossing a free state border like Jordan, Iraq, Syria. And why they are there? Because Iranians mainly pass through Syria via Iraq, and they were using these areas to send weapons from Iraq to Syria, from Syria to Lebanon, to support Hezbollah, etc., etc. That is why also military presence in Syria is important to break the so-called Shia arc, because we all know that the Iranian support, arms, cash, money, they are going to Lebanon, to Hezbollah, via Iraq, Syria, Lebanon route. So military presence in Syria is important for the United States, and definitely, at least as far as the president of the United States, I don't believe that Americans will leave Syria. If there will be no big deal between US and Turkey, like, okay, we are giving you Kurds, you can either digest them, but I don't know what Turkey should do. Maybe to stop Turkish stream or to stop this parallel import for Russia first through Europe and etc. Only if there's some big change in Turkish Russia policy, maybe the United States will say, okay, probably I can leave Syria, but this is less likely because at the end of the day, even if Turkey decides to somehow be definitely and 100% anti-Russian, again, as I mentioned, military presence in Syria important for US also to control or somehow prevent this money and weapons flow from Iran to Lebanon via Iraq and Syria, and also to have a leverage against Turkey. Because as far as Erdogan in power, that Erdogan can say one thing and after 1 week, completely different thing. So you should always have leverages against Erdogan.
Okay, let's briefly touch on one of our favorite topics of 2022, the Turkish Armenian so-called normalization process. We have with us Professor Vahram Ter-Matevosyan, who is an associate professor and chair of the Political Science and International Affairs program at the AUA, the American University of Armenia. His research interests focus on Turkish politics, Kemalism, political Islam, and security in the South Caucasus. There were reports from Turkey and Azerbaijan that the fifth meeting of the special representatives is set for September, but Armenia did not confirm this. In other articles on the topic, it was reported that Pashinyan and Kilic have apparently talked over 500 times so far in 2022, and that Kilic is now insisting that the next meeting must happen either in Turkey or Armenia. Meanwhile, as far as we know, the border has not yet been opened for anyone, including citizens of third countries. And if you recall, the promise after the fourth meeting was that this would happen. So the question is, Vahram, what is the current status of the discussions, and what do you think are the main points of discussion or contention?
Right, thank you for this opportunity to speak to you again. Well, I think there's unfortunately only bad news in this regard. The bad news is that Turkey continues to play with the same toolbox that it has been playing since 1991 or 1983, depending on your stance. And the toolbox are following to gain time and to create the impression that there is a process, there is an honest interest and frank interest on the Turkish side to move things ahead. While Turkey has been polishing and mastering the entire process while dealing with Armenians, unfortunately, we cannot say that on the Armenian part. The Armenian diplomacy steadily fall into the methods that Turkish diplomacy is very good at, and that is trying to create the impression of a process while leaving aside the ultimate objective. And the ultimate objective for Armenia is to open up the borders, to establish diplomatic relations, and to move forward. While you mentioned that it's a Turkish-Armenian normalization process, I even doubt that we can call it a normalization process. We have so many questions, and the 500 phone calls that Romanian allegedly have been having for the past months, it's still not enough to understand what are they really discussing. And I can say from Roman Romanian's interviews that he is quite frustrated. He understands limitations. He understands that the unsurmountable difficulties that he's facing in these negotiations. He understands the limits of Armenia's diplomacy, Armenia's positions. But I guess his job is just to continue the negotiations. But I think this strategy should be revamped at this point. Why? Because this is not working. Because Armenian diplomacy, Armenia's foreign policy is currently sandwiched between Azerbaijan and Turkey on a number of levels. And Turkish leaders are not hiding the fact that whatever they're doing, they will not have a final green light unless Azerbaijan says so. And these are like red flags. Every corner our Armenian negotiators and foreign policy architects are facing. These are all red lines. And this is a moment that Armenian diplomacy, Armenian foreign policy, who are responsible for the Armenian foreign policy, they should ask for sort of, if I can use this word, foreign assistance, because the United States, the European Union, other than making verbal statements supporting the process, you don't see much going on the Turkish Armenian. Yes, there is some support coming from the Azerbaijani-Armenian negotiations, but you don't see that, and that's a huge question, huge question mark out there, and it's not being discussed. So that's first. Where we are now, I guess, when you hear the interviews from the Armenian representative, one of the most often referred to phrase is hopefully. I mean, well, it's not a good indication when you use this kind of wording in interviews after talking to a Turkish counterpart. It means that there are too many questions out there, and there's no certainty enough to elaborate on these questions. Moreover, when we hear back each time after a meeting, when Armenian representative talks about some of the questions, you can see that what he expected before, what he faced after at the meeting, were quite different. So I can feel that there is a component of surprise also each time that Turkish negotiators are putting on the table, sometimes putting Armenians off guard and off balance, and trying to surprise Armenian side with an impression that there is a process and Turkish side is genuinely interested.
Why do you think Turkey is pressing to meet only in Turkey or Armenia for the next meeting?
Well, first of all, there was a precedent also already in the past. It did happen before. And again, I think the place, other than having a symbolic significance for the process, doesn't matter. It's more what matters to me is what are they discussing? What is the essence of negotiations? If basically Turkey is saying we can negotiate for as long as it takes until and unless Azerbaijan says, yes, we're good to go, what are we negotiating really? Because I imagine that what they are talking about is not only about Armenian-Turkish interstate diplomatic relations. I have all the reasons to think that Turkish representatives are discussing also questions related to history, perhaps not in an explicit way, but all the contentious issues that exist in our bilateral relations. I think Turkish representative would seize the opportunity and would discuss these issues during these discussions, at least preparing a ground, paving ground to raise these issues when there's a good opportunity.
Vahram, as soon as this process started, the Armenian side has assured the public that there will be no preconditions. They are conducting these negotiations without any preconditions. And they have cited, and I don't know if the Turkish side has also said this, but they have cited the Turkish side also saying, they don't have any preconditions. As we see from the developments over the last months, Turkish officials at the highest levels have now tied the normalization process to the Armenian-Azerbaijani negotiations. Specifically, Turkey seems to be saying that Azerbaijan has a power of veto over the process, and the implication is that the process won't reach fruition until Azerbaijani demands from Armenia are satisfied, which, let's not mince words, those are preconditions. So at what point is this talk of no preconditions become so farcical that it's impossible to hide? I mean, to me, at least it is impossible. But do you think that this this language from the Rubinyan and the Armenian government that there are no preconditions, do you think that the Armenian public is buying that?
No, absolutely, you're right, Hovik. And even though in all the statements that two representatives made, in all the after meeting statements, they have the sentence without preconditions. And there were 4 meetings so far. Of each meeting, 4 or 5 meetings. After each statement, they were saying they agreed to go ahead without any preconditions, but there are number of preconditions. One of the preconditions, as you indicated, is the obvious one that we see at the top of the iceberg, that Turkey wants to Turkey is ready to seriously consider opening the border, establishing diplomatic relations only after Azerbaijan gets what it plans to do in Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Nagorno Karabakh.
Which itself is also very open-ended, right? We don't know what Azerbaijan's demand.
Exactly. When you hear, when you refer to the November 9th statement, when you hear its different interpretations in Yerevan, in Moscow, in Baku, it leaves the door for imagination and different interpretations. And each time Baku gets something, you see that the rhetoric changes. They want more and more for nothing, for not giving up any position. So this is the fundamental. This is what we need to understand and the Armenian part. Only establishing full normal diplomatic relations can neutralize any kind of risks and threats that are associated with opening the border. I have been saying this for many years now. It's a strategic mistake to agree on the condition of opening the border on temporary basis or for third country citizens. Imagine there is a tense situation on the border, like it's happening as we speak, actually, as we speak now. There is something wrong going on the border, and Turkish side decides to close the border. Okay, the situation calms down, and they decide, okay, let's open the border. Armenians are starting to behave well. And then it happens again somewhere, some part of Karabakh. And then the Turkish side decides, okay, Armenians are not behaving, we're closing down the border. No, we don't want to become a Gaza sector. We don't want to have an open border situation, and it depends on the mood of a bureaucrat sitting somewhere and whispering in the ears of Erdogan. This is what the situation, Erdogan gives an order. Okay, it's time to punish Armenians. Just close the border. And what does opening the border for third country citizens mean, really? I mean, I gave a number of interviews trying to raise this question, and no sensible answers came to any of the corners from the government. What does it really mean? What do we get out of this? And what do taxpayers sitting in Armenia pay? How is it possible to cooperate, have an interagency cooperation with Turkish counterparts without having diplomatic relations? Because having an open border regime for certain country citizens requires also exchange of information. There is a problem of trying to institutionalize it. So there are also problems of information exchange. Also, are the certain country citizens allowed to cross the border with the cars, with their properties? Yeah, can they? How many days are they allowed to have the permission to visit Turkey or Armenia? And also refugee and asylum seekers problem. These are all number of problems that exist out there. Have all these issues been considered when Armenians agreed to start talking about this opening of the border for third country citizens? So having this surprise element each time going to negotiations is not a good indication.
So does this process contain anything positive for Armenia, or is normalization simply a different term for capitulation on the Western front?
Well, there are different interpretations of the process. I'm sure you are aware of this aspect. Some of them are saying it's good to talk, it's good to keep the communication channels open. Some are saying, no, these negotiations they bring no effort. We should just stop, not to give the impression to Turkey that we are binding their argument, we agree with their terms. Well, I think it's too early to call this process normalization. For any process to be called normalization, you need a number of conditions to be met. First of all, they need to meet in good faith, the negotiators. They need to have working groups which are open to the public, which are periodically briefing to the public about the real result, not the anticipated result, not about the hopes that they have from the negotiations. And most importantly, after negotiating for 9 months, or if we can call negotiations, after meetings in different capitals, it's time to come up with something tangible, with something that could be put on the table and discussed with the public. And this hasn't been done other than that notion of opening the border for the country, for the citizens of the country. Other than that, I don't think there's anything tangible. So it's time to shake down the process, to bring new elements, to bring new dimensions to this process, and to seek some external support. I know the world is occupied with Ukrainian crisis, but this place is no less significant. So this is what I would say about this process. Therefore, I don't think there is anything positive at the moment.
If truly there is nothing positive in this process, what choice, what agency does Armenia have? Some people are saying that we must negotiate. Negotiating is better than war, and no matter what, I think we should try to negotiate. But does it come to a point where Armenia has the option or should exercise its option and right to walk out of this process and basically tell it for what it is, basically that it's a coercive process?
Yes, I guess Armenia has that option. I don't know. I mean, theoretically it has. I don't know in reality whether Armenia realizes, acknowledges that there is such an option. That option is to turn the entire process upside down. And what I mean by that is the following. So basically, Turkish side is saying we want the border to be opened and negotiations and relations to be established. Open the border. We can open the border only if you agree with Azerbaijan and meeting all the terms that Azerbaijan has put on the table. Not only the realization of November 9th statement, but also basically whatever Azerbaijan says. And I'm sure Azerbaijan has a long list of wishes. And when Azerbaijan will stop, it's a big question. And what I'm suggesting is that now that Armenia has tied up, Armenia has voluntarily tied up its hands with both Turkey and Azerbaijan, Armenian side can just turn upside down and say, we are not negotiating with Turkey, with Azerbaijan, unless the question of the status of Nagorno Karabakh is brought on the agenda of the discussions. We are not getting anything anyway out of Armenian-Turkish meetings, right? There is nothing tangible, like I said. We're not getting anything tangible out of Armenian-Azerbaijani meetings. They meet in Brussels, they meet in Moscow. Yes, there is demarcation delimitation committee meeting here and there, but this Azerbaijani list is long enough. So turning upside down the entire paradigm of negotiations can open up a space for negotiations. And negotiation requires preparation. Negotiation requires a lot of investment, time investment, resource investment, and you cannot go to negotiations with a hope for a surprise, for strategic surprise. There is no such thing as surprise. And this moment of hopelessness that the government of Armenia should leave behind. I understand from a human standpoint that it's difficult, challenging time. There's too much pressure on the Armenian government, but they should seek the support of Armenian diplomats, experts from outside of Armenia, come and help them to come up with new formulas. And from time to time, we hear smart ideas in different pages, in different news platforms, but they're not channeled into the government so that they can sit down and discuss these ideas so that we can come up with a new strategy. This strategy is strategy to nowhere.
Okay, thank you, Professor Vahram Ter-Matevosyan. As a final topic, we had an opportunity to ask both Vahram Ter-Matevosyan and Aras Sanjian for their views and remembrance about Mikhail Gorbachev, who passed away this past week at the age of 91. Aras Sanjian is an associate professor of history and the director of the Armenian Research Center at the University of Michigan in Dearborn. Dr. Sanjian, Mikhail Gorbachev, who served as the last leader of the Soviet Union from 1988 to 1991, died this past week on August 30th. He was in charge when a number of momentous events in the life of the Armenian Soviet Republic happened. The earthquake in 1988, for one, the Karabakh Liberation Movement, the pogroms against Armenians in Azerbaijani Soviet Republic, and more. Both as a historian, as well as a student and researcher in Armenia during those times, how do you remember Gorbachev's time in leadership and the fall of the Soviet Union?
I think I will start with my teenage years. Well, still I was in Beirut at high school, where his name started to be discussed on the international media. For us in Lebanon, I think the moment when we realized that the Soviet Union was in very, very poor shape was 1982, when the Israelis invaded Lebanon and essentially the Soviets were out of the picture. And for weeks, as if, Lebanon was left alone under Israeli bombs, and the only country who could make a difference was America. And we all knew that America and Israel were very close friends. So in that sense, I think when Brezhnev died later that year, there was an expectation that something should change in the Soviet Union. We were realizing that the Soviet leadership was becoming a gerontocracy, older people. And I think the first time people started talking the possibility of the torch being passed on to a younger generation in the name of Gorbachev was after Andropov died. But of course, at that time, it did not happen. But then when Chernenko died, again, very shortly, I think about a year after his being appointed as the new leader, Gorbachev came in. And by that time, already the Western media had started playing him up as a possible reformer. And essentially myself and probably all people outside the USSR were basically, I will not say brainwashed, but pushed into thinking positively about him. And in our own home, I think we supported reform in the Soviet Union because we hope that if things get better in the Soviet Union, they will also get better in our own homeland, in Armenia. I don't think that my decision to go, or my parents' decision to send me to study in Armenia had anything to do with Gorbachev coming in, but the fact that there was a new leader who was talking about reform and change probably even encouraged them further to do that. And I remember when I first went to Armenia, it was in the fall of 1986, that he was very popular in Armenia. Yeah. People were fed up with Garen Demircian. They thought Garen Demircian as an obstacle to reform, and essentially they wanted Gorbachev probably to remove him or bring somebody in his stead. So I feel that. And as we know, Gorbachev's reforms went step by step. He first talked about quickening the pace of production, uskorenia. Then came perestroika, which basically means reform and change. And then he talked about glasnost, openness. So for the first time, he was calling people outside the narrow circle of the Soviet party leadership, Communist Party leadership, to participate in the public debate about change, etc. So, and when I went in '86, glasnost was not that much evident, although the word was in the air. Then came the issue of democratization or democratization, that is elections within the party or some kind of choice for the people to elect, etc. And it was, I think, in the very late 1987 when I first started seeing in the Soviet Armenian press articles about the Stalin era, etc. I remember there was this very film by this Georgian filmmaker about an allegory about Beria, which most of the people went and saw. Unfortunately, I was still very new to the Soviet Union. My Russian was not that good then to be able to go and enjoy a film, so I didn't watch that film myself, although I remember all the people talk about it. The talk about Karabakh started, I think, around the middle of 1987, and it basically became a real issue, of course, in February of 1988, as we all know, when the local regional council, the regional Soviet, took that momentous decision to say we want to leave Azerbaijan and become part of Soviet Armenia. And although the Soviet position from day one was against any border changes among the Union republics, and this was consistently made, I think most Armenians, at least for 4 or 5 months in the beginning, were very helpful, but sooner or later Gorbachev and reformers will understand them and will grant their wishes. I think that break happened in the summer of 1988, especially when excerpts from that meeting, in which the Armenian demand was formally rejected, was televised on Soviet television. And basically, because the most authoritative person in that meeting was Gorbachev, he had to intervene and basically tell the Armenians that this is the red lines that you cannot cross. I think it's only after that this ideas that we want to leave the Soviet Union, we want to become independent, gradually started taking shape, because it broke a myth that the Soviets had created over decades, that, being inside the Soviet Union is the best thing for Armenia, and ultimately the interests of the Soviet Union at large coincide with the Armenian national interests. And from then on, I think relations always remained sour between Gorbachev and various shades of political opinion in Armenia, because with Glasnost, of course, we already started seeing a new political and ideological landscape in Armenia, with different views being expressed, from the most radical to still the most traditional pro-Soviet. So you had a wide range of opinions at that time. There was a moment just after the earthquake where Karabakh was tied directly to the central authorities in Moscow, and some people saw that as some kind of a hope. But in the end, that continued for less than 1 year, and Karabakh was returned to Azerbaijani authority.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I think, because the popular movement in Armenia, led by the Armenian pan-national national movement, was more radical in its demands than anything equivalent in Azerbaijan. So it appeared that the Soviet Communist Party leadership was more in control of Azerbaijan than its Armenian counterpart in Armenia. Sooner or later, Gorbachev also sided in that way, because for him, maintaining the Soviet Union as a political structure was very, very important.
Right.
While in Armenia, those who wanted to secede were gaining ground. Of course, Armenia was not the only republic which was trying to do that, but there were a number of others. So essentially, something like a break occurred sometime in 1989, 1990, where essentially the three Slavonic republics and the other Turkic republics were seen as one bloc, and all the other mostly nominally Christian republics on the western borders of the Soviet Union, from the Baltics to Armenia, were seen as more dissident and troublesome. And I think the worst thing that happened was when Azerbaijan actually participated in the referendum to keep the Soviet Union alive. In return, Gorbachev agreed to that Operation Ring, which was in the spring of 1991, as far as I remember, when some villages around Karabakh, were actually practically ethnically cleansed from their Armenian population. But in the end, so the situation for Karabakh was quite desperate at the time. It was only the changes that happened because of the failed coup attempt that gave a new life to the Karabakh movement. And then, of course, the rest is history, of which Gorbachev is no longer part of it.
Yeah.
So I think after the putsch, he really became irrelevant. He had a competitor in Yeltsin, and most Armenian reformers preferred Yeltsin to Gorbachev. Yeltsin also had some kind of sympathy towards the Armenians, something which later Russian leaders did not necessarily share. So, and of course, that really pushed Gorbachev into the oblivion. When he died, I was expecting for him to die because he was getting old. And I was curious what kind of reactions will be. Most of the reactions on social media from Armenia were negative, but I was really expecting more than that, in a way, simply because I think of the Armenian broken hopes about him, from the fact that we still do not know how that pogrom in Sumgait could happen.
Yeah.
His insistence not to detach Karabakh away from Azerbaijan. Later on, of course, his approval of Operation Ring and all these other things really made him very unpopular.
He made a number of decisions to actually hold back the Soviet troops from protecting Armenians in Sumgait and Baku.
Well, I really don't want to go into details of that aspect because I really don't know what exactly happened. I really haven't seen, maybe there is, but I haven't seen any study which talks about Sumgait from the Russian or the Soviet central decision-making political perspective. So all we have to know is to guess from what mostly, at least on the Armenian side, what the refugees from Sumgait, those who escaped the slaughter, did tell, and then we have to make a picture about it. But also at the same time, I want to remember that it was because of Gorbachev's reforms that a lot of freedom was given to discuss the past, for example. And I was in that generation who was studying in Soviet Union, and suddenly some of the history textbooks, especially those about Soviet history, became very irrelevant. I remember I was among those who used to queue up in the very morning to read newspapers, because newspapers suddenly became very, very interesting. They started publishing things that had never been published before in the Soviet Union. So that aspect of Gorbachev should also not be forgotten in that sense. And without Gorbachev, Armenians would not have dared to open up the Karabakh issue with that forceful commitment that they did in 1987, 1988. But in the end, I think, and I haven't read much about what has been written about Gorbachev since Gorbachev, because I'm not a Soviet era specialist, but I don't assume that much has been written about this, because otherwise I'm sure via Armenian sources it would have come to me. I assume that Gorbachev also had many, many reasons to dislike the Armenians, in the same way as the Armenians came to dislike him, because by opening this issue of territorial changes, administrative boundary changes in the Soviet Union, we put on his plate something that he really thought was a real distraction from his own agenda. And his own agenda, first and foremost, was, of course, making the Soviet economy more viable. I think all the other things like glasnost and perestroika, etc., were means to reach that aim, to make the Soviet Union more competitive on the international scene. I think that was what he wanted. But in the end, since the road to hell is paved with good intentions, for him, the hell was the destruction of the country that he wanted to improve.
Okay, I guess we'll leave that one there for today. Thank you, Ara.
Okay.
Thanks for your time.
You're welcome.
The next day, we asked Vahram Ter-Matevosyan for his impressions of Gorbachev. So the question is, Vahram, both as a historian and as a person who lived through those times, how do you remember Gorbachev's time in leadership and the fall of the Soviet Union?
Yes, Mikhail Gorbachev, being the leader of the Soviet Union, he came to power in 1985. And this was a tumultuous period for the Soviet Union. Within 4 or 5 years, the Soviet Union had 4 leaders. So each leader was older than the previous one. And Gorbachev, of course, people were hoping that he could bring new blood into the system, who could regenerate the system. But it was too late. All the scholars of the Soviet Union agree that Gorbachev was not the right person to lead the reforms in that difficult period. And Gorbachev came in a time when the Soviet Union was already facing a number of challenges, a number of fronts, plus the war in Afghanistan, plus the economic, financial issue that it's facing, plus all the nationality question that was quite challenging also already for Moscow. The way I want to remember that guy, not as a historian, but as a citizen of the Republic of Armenia, is with the following fact. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, to the best of my knowledge, he hasn't been able to visit any of the Union republics. And this is an indication that he was not a welcome person to any other republics, because the final 3 years of his rule were associated with misery, with suffering, and with demolition, and with displacement of many people, and with killings and casualties. He, outside of the Soviet Union, was seen in this positive light that he is the one which is reformist ideas who brought this empire to its end. But within the Soviet Union, he's remembered as a person who was inept, who was unable to make decisions which would solve the problems, and which created more problems than solutions. So that, yes, this is how I remember, and this is how I interpret. But as a historian, of course, I can go on bring different ideas and interpretations of these deeds and misdeeds.
If I may just ask one question, and without belaboring the topic, but in summary, do you believe that there is serious controversy or debate in Gorbachev's treatment of Armenia and the issue of Artsakh? Because I feel that some historians or some academics who look at things from a global sense, whether if they're liberal, then I don't want to simplify things, but if they're liberal, then Gorbachev did some good things, and if they're very conservative or they're sort of maybe associated with one of the republics that didn't like him, they have a completely negative view. But do you believe that there is serious academic debate about his policies with regard to Karabakh or Armenia and other sort of
One
conflicts?
quick note to add here. We talked with Professor Sanjian about this as well yesterday, and he noted that, in fairness to Gorbachev, he never anticipated this Nagorno Karabakh issue. It took him by surprise and derailed his focus from his main intent to fix the Soviet economy through his perestroika and glasnost agenda.
No, Ara is right. Normally, just imagine whatever Armenians presented, multiply that with 14, 15 union republics, depending whether you count Russia or not. But of course, he has a point. And just imagine the magnitude of expectations that Gorbachev had to deal with. He was the one who initiated this openness, this process of reforms and democratization, glasnost, perestroika. He was the one who opened the floodgate, and he was the one who had to be open to embrace these diverse views and opinions and requests coming from the Union republics, which have been brewing since the 1950s, since the de-Stalinization process kicked off. So, and that's why Ara is certainly right. So therefore, I think the legacy of Gorbachev is widely discussed in the academia. In the American schools, universities like Stephen Hawking and others, and Ronald Sunni have extensively covered the collapse of the Soviet Union. They have written extensively on the topic. And the consensus is that the Soviet Union was given a chance in the face of Gorbachev to reform the system if he was a little bit more bold and more responsible and more open to face some of the tough questions. But undoubtedly, when it comes to the Armenian context, I think the situation is a little bit more complex. Hovik, I think in the Armenian context, these conversations are, at least in the academia, are tied up with the Karabakh question, how Gorbachev handled the Karabakh question, because he handled it in a horrific way, in the most irresponsible way. So that's why the Armenian context, the discussion is very much camouflaged by his handling of the Karabakh question. But his true legacy, his true impact and imprint on Soviet Armenia, on final years of Soviet Armenia and the continuation is yet to be discussed in a very open and academic, scholarly way.
Okay. Thank you, Vahram.
Thank you,
Thank
Vahram.
you very much.
All right, let's wrap up our topics here. I'd like to ask each of you if there's been something on your mind this past week that you want to talk about. Benjamin, do you have anything on your mind?
No, I believe we covered everything, at least in geopolitics.
Okay. Hovik, what's on your mind?
Well, I think we debated on whether to cover this or not. Basically, the Prosecutor General of Armenia has, on the day before his last day in his position, basically made a call to create conditions to reintroduce the death penalty in Armenia. Specifically, I think he mentioned for treason. I think the reason that we didn't cover it, we shouldn't cover it now, because there have been many cases where this is some kind of a red herring, and it's introduced more to basically, in my opinion, at least, to create commotion in the population. But, it's important to note that the same Prosecutor General had made a proposal right after the war to criminalize hate speech. And we saw how that turned out. It didn't even last for a year, I believe. and it was decriminalized. It's shocking that Armenia wants to introduce a death penalty. I think we should think about it. It's just like I don't know how to process it, and I don't even know how this government, which can't even sort of control its borders or which can't even sort of introduce a normal economic policy, is going to introduce such a complex legal project to basically make the death penalty legal again. But I just thought that people should be on the lookout for anything new on this.
All right, we're going to leave it there for today. Thank you, Benjamin. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you, Asmet. Thank you, Hovik. Thank you for having me.
That's our show this week. We hope you found it informative. Now go find us on social media and follow us. We'll talk to you next week.